everyone. I've had several requests from folks about wallpaper. I use a lot of wallpaper in my projects, and so I'm going to do hopefully I can keep it a two-part series on using wallpaper in your projects, and then give you 10 things that you can do with them. And hopefully these are things that you might not have thought of before, that are maybe not the obvious things. And then also just to give you some ideas about what else you find in wallpaper books that you can use and how else you can use them. So here we go. I'm going to do this at a high level first, and if there's anything that you want to see in greater detail, just let me know. Either drop me a line or leave feedback, and I'd be happy to accommodate that. But I thought I'd start with the high level first. So first of all, when we think of wallpaper, I think a lot of people think of the tacky stuff in most people's 1970s houses, and don't necessarily think about all the different kinds of wallpaper that there are out there. And so I thought I'd show you some examples of some of the more unusual wallpapers, but they're readily available in lots of wallpaper books. So for example, lots of metallics. I can't imagine doing my house up in that, but that does exist. This is almost like a fabric-like material, but it is in fact a wallpaper sample. These are real textured, so you have, typical grass cloth, and then, I don't know what you would call this, it's more like a fabric-y grass cloth, and then this is almost like a natural paper, but it's quite thick. And then you have a lot of embossed, glittered, and, just sort of roughed. I would say it's almost like a sand texture on this one. These are obviously very glittery, and with large and small patterns. Most of the wallpaper books have, the large sort of thick covers, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But there's other things that you can find inside these books as well. Sometimes they'll have little embellishment samples that go with the product line. There's always a handle, at least one, on the back of the book, on the spine of the book. Sometimes they have things like fabric samples and like little embellishments, tassels and things. When you have paper, sorry for moving, but when you have paper that's like this textured paper, they often put a piece of vellum between that and the next page. And so I've, taken vellum out of these books and kept that because it's obviously very handy to use in crafting. And then between sections of the wallpaper, so between the different sort of you'll have a pattern and then several colorways and then another pattern. Between the patterns, there's usually, one or more pages that talks about it in the book, but sometimes in the back of those, it's entirely blank, or the majority of the pages. So I've cut out a number of those that I use all the time because it's like a kind of a thin cardstock, but it's real handy to have, and I'll show you some things that you can do with those. So in addition to some of the new books that you probably are more familiar with, like the one on the right, there's also a number of vintage books out there. This is one of the oldest examples that I have. Again, I'm sorry for moving the camera, but I'm having to hold and do this at the same time. And this is an example of this is actually a Japanese company. It's obviously quite old, but I don't even know if they're still around. But that has some really unique patterns and designs of grass cloth that are in here. Again, quite old. And a modern book, which is this one by Sandpiper Studios, has, more sort of tradition, or what you would consider traditional designs. This is an example of a company that does primarily two-dimensional, or this book at least has mainly two-dimensional wallpaper. One of the things to keep in mind when you're doing things with wallpaper is that typically the patterns are designed for, a large background. So obviously they're designed to cover a room rather than something like a mini book or a card. And in those cases, you have to take into consideration how a much smaller forum is going to look for the paper that you're looking at. So even though it might be beautiful, it might not be appropriate for what you're using it for. So those are the kinds of things that you're going to have to take into consideration. And as I go through each of the projects, I'll talk to you about some of the positives and negatives about using wallpaper instead of regular paper in your projects. And then the last type of element that you'll find often in wallpaper books are the borders. Usually each design will have a coordinating border, and these are just some of the ones that I've saved over the years. These are real handy to use. For example, something like this, which has a fringe or sort of cut out edge to it, I've used to decorate the sides of mini books. I'll show you projects where I've used some of the thin maritime style. And then obviously I can see using those at some point, so those are in my little stash. And then some real vintagey looking ones like this, where it's kind of a cross between the nautical and the vintage. But a number of really fabulous designs that you can either cut out or use in projects. And again, I'll go through those one at a time and kind of show you how and when it might be appropriate to use things like borders and trims in your projects. So as someone who's used wallpaper for a long period of time in my craft projects, I can tell you that the hardest part about it is actually getting the wallpaper cut down to size so that you can use it. But once you do, it's so worth it. And I'll just show you what I've done. This is my first project example of the 10. I'm hoping to get through 5 in this video. Again, I'm going to do these at a high level. If you want more information, please send me a note or provide feedback, and I'd be happy to give you a more in-depth tutorial. But basically everything you see here is made entirely out of the wallpaper books. There's nothing that I got outside except for tape and glue. So the one on the left, the 12 by 12 wallpaper box, is actually constructed using exclusively the covers of wallpaper books, sample books. And then I actually covered it in the wallpaper samples itself. And I've made probably 8 or 10 of them. And they're color coordinated, so I see on the spine what color wallpaper samples are actually in the box. On the right-hand side, well, when you cut a typical piece of wallpaper, the typical size, sort of the larger sizes, I can usually get a 12 by 12 piece of paper out of it, and then at least one 8 by, I think these are 8.5 by 8.5, as well as usually there's a leftover, and I'll show you what I do with those in one of my other projects. But these books are real handy, and forgive me, I'm going to move for a second, but by putting them in these, I find that I'm much better able to, you know, actually use them, because I have something I can just flip through like anything else. And then on the backs of them, I put like a little hanging tag, and in a few minutes I'll show you why I've done that. But I've gotten in my craft room an actual place where I display or hang things, kind of in a retail rack. And so that's why I've set it up this way, and that's what's worked the best for me, but obviously everybody will have to do what's best for themselves. However, these boxes are certainly handy, and I've got to tell you, they last a long time because it's nice, thick chipboard. You know, I've learned the best way to construct them. I've made a lot of mistakes getting there, but anyway, they seem to hold up pretty well, and it doesn't take nearly as long as you might think. So that is the end of the first project, or the end of the first example of what you can do. Okay, so this is the second example of something you can do with wallpaper samples. And in this example, you'll see exactly what I did with one of those borders that I showed you earlier. I've made boxes. I mentioned that when I cut down the wallpaper pages, I typically have enough for a 12 by 12 sheet, at least one 8.5 by 8.5, and often there's even a little bit left over after that. And with the leftovers, this is what I've done with them. So again, I apologize for having to move, but and then inside of here, I have all of my 6 by 6 paper color coordinated so that I can easily find it and use it in projects. And I have 2 boxes like this. And you can see from the lid that it really is just a wallpaper box. Again, totally constructed with wallpaper samples. With the exception of the outside, I will say that that's actually a remnant. It's not a sample because I wouldn't have had enough. But I wanted to take this opportunity to show you one of the positive things about wallpaper is that, so obviously craft rooms get dirty. I'm just taking a baby wipe and wiping it off. These are usually plastified to some extent, and that does mean that you have to use special inks and things when you're working with them, and I'll go through that in detail as we go through the projects, but it certainly is handy when you make mistakes or get something dirty because it just comes right off. So just wanted to give you a perfect example of why that's handy. So, all right, that's the second thing you can do with wallpaper samples. Okay, and this is the third example of what you can do. It's actually kind of a two-piece example here, but anyway, these are flowers, and every one of these flowers has at least some component of wallpaper samples in it. So I'll just take you through the ones in the middle are wallpaper samples with fabric or repurposed, you know, like the dollar store fabric flowers that you can buy. Those are probably grunged up and sprayed with glimmer sprays, and just added a pearl to the middle. I think the inside little flowers are usually made of paper in that case, but basically the main flower is wallpaper samples. This one here, the largest one on the right, is exclusively wallpaper samples. And on all three of these examples, the ones on the left are fabric, obviously, but the reason I included them is because all three of them have been done in packaging that uses wallpaper samples as the background for them. And so that makes it possible to package them up and give them out as gifts, and really turns them into something very nice to look at. And again, you'll see that I have, you know, little hanging tags on them, and I'll show you where those go on the display rack later, but it makes it nice and easy for me to see them, so I actually use them. I have far too many of them at the moment, though, so I'm going to have to figure out what to do with them. And then this example I just wanted to show you is a little flower. So this is actually entirely made, I think it's almost exclusively, except for the center. This is obviously a button, but this is paper. The outside is a wallpaper sample that's cut with a, you know, border trim punch, and then it's just made into a rosette. It's packaged with just a little tiny piece of wallpaper sample in the background, but it came, that's what the package actually is. It's from like a little Inka Dinka Doo clear stamps. So there's, you know, instead of just making my own packaging, I actually repurpose existing packaging that I get from my other purchases and do it that way. Okay, so this is item number 4 of things that you can do with the things that you find inside wallpaper books. And this is not a unique idea. I know that there's other people out there who have recommended that you make punch-out dies to store your laces and trims. Again, this is really a handy way to do it because I really do go through and look at everything I have and use it, which is really wonderful. But this is entirely done. All of the cards are actually used. I used those inserts that I showed you from the wallpaper books that are kind of a light cardstock, and those work perfectly for it. So anyway, that is just another handy dandy little tip of something you can do with your wallpaper book. Okay, and then this is going to be the final tip for this video, and then I'll continue with 5 more in a second video. But this is cards and envelopes that I've made that are almost exclusively wallpaper samples. So these designs do not, I think, you know, on the cards especially, I'm pretty sure that I downloaded that design, at least the basis of the design. It might not have been with the fishes and everything, but on this card, those were cut out in my cutting machine. And yeah, everything you see there except for the little raffia strap is made of wallpaper. The little punches are punched out of wallpaper and everything. So those are pretty cute. And then this is a little flip-flop card, and I'm sure again I found at least the idea for it online. The inside, you know, on both of these I put a regular piece of cardstock or paper just so that I have something I can write on, but the entire outside of both of these cards is made of stuff that I got out of the wallpaper books. Then this year I did my Christmas cards, and I had some of the wallpaper flowers that I showed you a few minutes ago. and I did them on mounted them on a collage background that I made with wallpaper samples and music scores. And so I thought that turned out pretty cool. And then made these really neat little envelopes, and I just have it open like this so that you can actually see how it's done. It's the double arches punch that I used on one end of it, but that is exclusively made out of a wallpaper sample as well. And one thing to note in here that I will make a comment about, on the other side of the wallpaper samples, there's often something written like the sample name and number and order information. So when you cut it out, you do want to be, cognizant of that so that you don't have it showing on the parts that you're exposed. All right, so that is my 5 first tips. Stay tuned for the second video, which will have tips 6 through 10, and I'm going to talk about mini albums, mini album covers, and lots of home decorating tips and things that I've done with wallpaper samples as well. So stay tuned.